Happily, I will share with you some of my insights as a Jungian analyst and as a Jesuit who accompanies spiritual exercises, retreats in the Ignatian tradition. We are going to talk about transformation. So, what is spirituality and what is transformation? What about the stuff we fill into the hermetic vessel, the container of analysis? And what about the transformative process? In stercore invenitur, found in filth, says Jung. When Jung talks in 1932 at the Alsatian Pastoral Conference, he calls it a religious outlook. I quote, all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, among all those, there has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost what the living religions of every age have given to their followers, and none of them has been really healed who did not regain his or her religious outlook. This, of course, has nothing whatever to do with a particular creed or membership of a church. We see this spiritual healing is not religious in a confessional way. It is spiritual as we use this umbrella term nowadays. But what about the milestones of this transformative process? What about mapping the transformative process? Let's use Wilfried Bion's notations. Bion says, within this usage, I've used the term transformation in three ways that need to be distinguished from each other. The term transformation related to, first, the total operation, which includes the act of transforming and the end product. For this, I shall use the sign T. Second, the process of transformation, sign T alpha. And third, the end product, sign T beta. In the session, the facts of his behavior are like the facts of a painting, and from them I must find the nature of his representation, or in terms of my notation, the nature of that which I denote by the sign T, patient beta. From the analytic treatment as a whole, I hope to discover from the invariance in this material what O is, what he does to transform O. That is to say, the nature of T, patient alpha, and consequently the nature of T patient. The last point in the set of transformation, the group of transformations to which his particular transformation, T patient, is to be assigned. Bion uses this letter O in a Kantian sense, the thing in itself, which cannot be known, but which has to be supposed. So there's the transformation, T alpha towards T beta equates transformation of knowledge into O. And this O is the spiritual, the mystical. Faith in O is crucial for both the patient and the analyst. According to Bion, we may call O minus G, the negativity of God, provoking suffering as the absent breast provokes suffering in the infant and provokes a thought. Beyond can be understood in the context of negative or apophatic theology. We cannot, in a positive way, in a cataphatic way, describe what God is, only what he or she is not. Conversely, the experience of God begins when conceptual, cataphatic knowledge K fails. Two of Jung's favorite mystics are representatives of negative theology. Eckhard and St. John of the Cross. Consequently, O is not only the first milestone of therapy, the beginning of the process, but also the last milestone, the ultimate outcome which cannot be reached. You cannot control it. The whole process equals the transformation K into O. With reference to St. John of the Cross, dark night, the suffering from the absence of God is a God experience, and Bion formulates the transformation of cataphatic knowledge into the apophatic experience of O. Bion repeats it several times that the analyst should impose on himself a positive discipline of eschewing memory and desire. I quote Bion, "I do not mean that forgetting is enough. What is required is a positive act of refraining from memory and desire. It may be wondered what state of mind is welcome if desires and memories are not. A term that would express approximately what I need to express is faith. Faith that there is an ultimate reality and truth, the unknown, unknowable, formless, infinite. This must be believed of every object of which the personality can be aware the evolution of ultimate reality, signified by O, has issued in objects of which the individual can be aware." And he ends this book of 1970 by a famous quotation. "What is to be sought is an activity that is both the restoration of God, the Mother," he says, "and the evolution of God, the formless, infinite, ineffable, non-existent, which can be found only in the state in which there is no memory, desire, understanding." End of this quotation. Really, at this moment, when we talk about spiritual experience, we are aiming at the opposite, discussing knowledge about O, about mystical experience. It is true, Bion addresses this K and the process O towards K. But he provides several points of view, vertices, he says, several perspectives of faith, which is so important when we consider Jung's reflections on spiritual transformations. Of course, all our facilities, typological facilities, enter in this process, not only thinking. Formulating equations with a sense of direction entails a linear model of progression or of human development from cradle to grave. Beyond's point of view and Beyond's perspective of the mystical and of psychoanalysis is circular in the following sense. It is circular, and you have the three letters A, O, and K. A for hypothesis, rhetorical device, wherein the speaker brings up a subject by either denying it or denying that it should be brought up. For instance, I refuse to discuss the rumor that my opponent is the drunk. Apophatic theology, also known as negative theology, is a form of theological thinking and practice, for instance in meditation, which attempts to approach God, the divine, by negation, to speak only in terms of what may not be said about the perfect goodness and beauty and so on of that is God. Jung's model of individuation, too, is quite different from linear processes, from outcome models. Carl Vogel characterizes the process-outcome model of individuation as a circular therapeutical process theory. I quote Vogel, the therapeutic process can thus be defined as a compressed life path, as individuation under maximally favorable conditions. So, in a nutshell, in analysis, in this hermetic vessel, we have the whole life path under favorable conditions. According to Vogel, the Jungian transformational model is not linear, but a circular process, comprising pauses, regressions, decredo, putrefaction, and death, as Jung explains in the psychology of the transference. Despite the dimension of finality, individuation never comes to a final resting place where one can say it is done. It is an ongoing opus that is never final, never complete, as Mary Stein conveys. Among the methods of individuation in analysis, active imagination is vital for four reasons. First, it trains the art of letting things happen, action through non-action. Collected Works 13, paragraph 20. It is the creative expression of the process of individuation. It fosters this process by inquiring about imagined scenes, images, figures, about the meaning and relevance for the individual process, and eventually it trains the transcendent function, and therefore the union of opposites, divesting, as says Jung, the self of the false wrappings of the persona on the one hand, and of the suggestive power of primordial images on the other. Collected Works 7, paragraph 269. Now, what about imagination, active imagination in spiritual exercises? During the 30s, Jung comments on Nietzsche's Zarathustra, and in the yoga he moves, he says, on to a Western yoga form, if this word is applicable to the West at all, namely the Exercitia Spiritualia of St. Ignatius of Loyola, November 3rd, 1939. During the 30s, Jung teaches in Zurich, and we know what is happening at the same time in Germany. We remember what he says about Wotan, about Ergriffenheit, being seized by the archetype of the spirit. The bipolarity of the archetype of the spirit is a common theme in Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Nietzsche's inflation with the old wise, the spirit Zarathustra. And it's also a theme in yoga and in the Ignatian exercises seminars. Unfortunately, Jung did not make the exercises. In his autobiography, he tells Aniela Jaffe about his childhood memories with Jesuits forbidden by the Swiss Federal Constitution until 1973. However, he knew Hugo Rana and other Jesuits, and he studied the spiritual exercises text. In other words, he remains in this perspective O towards K. Experiences, as he says, December 15th, in the same year, not, however, in the strict Catholic form, because it's impossible for me to do that. But I did, at least to the best of my knowledge, and ability, present the meditation in a manner that closely resembled the way a Jesuit would perceive it. When Jung comments on imagination in the exercises, he is not only interested in the technical, methodological aspects of Ignatian exercises, what Ignatius proposes as imagination. He's intrigued by the difference between an active imagination, where the unconscious manifests itself, and a more passive, guided one. In other words, does imagination open or close the doors towards the uncountable, uncontrollable, undisposable, what we call unverfügbar, with Küchenhauf and Rosa, towards the O? Jung finds the criterion in Ignatius' more or less orthodox or dogmatically correct visions, and in particular in his visions of the serpent and the cross. And I will now quote Ignatius' autobiography, his reminiscences, in the number 19 first. While he was in the almshouse, something happened to him. Many times, in full daylight, he would see clearly something in the air alongside him, which would give him much consolation because it was very beautiful, enormously so. He couldn't properly make out what it was an image of, but somehow it seemed to him that it had the shape of a serpent. It had many things which shone like eyes, though they weren't eyes. He used to take much delight in and be consoled by seeing the thing, and the more times he saw it, the more his consolation would increase. And when that thing would disappear from his sight, he would feel sad about it. Here we have this discernment of spirits, changing from consolation to desolation and from desolation to consolation. And let's see the next paragraph, number 31. After this had lasted a good while, he went off to kneel at a cross which was nearby in order to give thanks to God. And there appeared to him that vision which had often been appearing and which he had never recognized, that is, that thing mentioned above, which seemed very beautiful to him with many eyes. But being in front of the cross, he could well see that thing of such beauty didn't have its normal color, and he recognized very clearly, with strong backing of his will, that it was the devil. And in this form later the devil had a habit of appearing to him, often and for a long time, and he, by way of contempt, would cast it aside with the staff he used to carry in his hand. In these passages, we encounter the beginning of the probably most crucial method of Ignatian spirituality, discernment of spirits. Already during his recovery, following his wounding in the Battle of Pamplona, Ignatius had observed the coming and going of opposed motions, emotions, consolation and desolation. Here in Manresa, after his first retreat he perceives consolation in the presence of the snake vision. And later on, in front of the cross, desolation provoked by the same vision. In the spiritual exercises, he will develop a sophisticated system for discerning which soul movement is prompted by the Holy Spirit and which is prompted by the devil's spirit. Importantly, this discernment is not cross-sectional, not even longitudinal, it is circular, encompassing experiences of standstill and deadlock where no longitudinal continuation is visible. Discernment of spirits and imagination. How does it work? And why is Jung so interested in Ignatius' visions? According to Jung, the undogmatic character of simple visions emerging from the unconscious is a sign of their authenticity. They are followed by an elaboration, as we have read, with strong backing of the will, as Ignatius says, and with a dogmatic subsumption. Let us read Liebscher in his introduction to volume 7. Liebscher summarizes Jung's choice to work through the Ignatian exercises in the lecture series of 1939 to 40, despite his lack of expert knowledge in this field, was triggered not least by his intention to compare his visionary experiences in the years from 1913 onward to the visions of St. Ignatius. So a certain parallelism between Ignatius and Jung, as Kenneth Becker says, unlikely companions, but companions. Let us read from June 7th, 1939, what Jung says. Then such visions can occur, which bring a kind of solution rather like an epiphany. It is a concretized epiphany. The result is then very often that a conscious conviction takes root, such as the belief that God particularly helped the person by appearing right at that very moment. Psychologically, this simply means that a certain typical moments of human life, spontaneous manifestations of the unconscious occur, which have this resolving effect. How such things are described is left to the discretion of the individuals and their convictions. End of this quotation. Jung in this quotation does not explicitly use the specific term discernment of spirits. In German it is, es ist der Weltanschauung des Einzelnen überlassen. The English translation, discretion, is closer to discernment. As Jung says, visions and imaginations are actively processed by discernment, which may be more or less dogmatic. In this context, what he calls dogmatic seems to hinder imagination. Surprisingly, but in line with that, during the Zarathustra seminars, he affirms that Catholic patients who may undergo the Jesuit training may have systematically destroyed their imagination. And now let us remember that continuation of text. We have first of all Ignatius, who makes an experience, who writes it down in the book of exercises. Jung, who comments on it in the 30s in German, And now we have the chance to read it in English, to read and discuss it. As a kind of contrast, I will now show you a recent study about changes in brain functional connectivity provoked by an Ignatian retreat. As a matter of course, this pre-post design is absolutely linear. The colored lines represent the connectivity, and the red ones increased connectivity, and the blue ones decreased connectivity. Let's have a look at two of the pre-post changes. In this slide we see increased connectivity at the right-hand side between the left pallidum, the primary dopaminergic region, and the right posterior cingulate. That could reflect how dopamine augments the self-awareness process over a more positive outlook on the self. Second, increased connectivity was between the posterior left cingulate gyrus and the right superior frontal gyrus and the left pallidum. Both the superior frontal gyrus and the posterior cingulate may be associated with self-awareness, since the posterior cingulate is a structure in the self-processing component of the default mode network. And the authors add, since a substantial element of the Ignatian retreat is spent in self-reflection and silence, increased connectivity between these structures could be consistent with such a subjective response. Before presenting you another example of spiritual transformation, I would like to take a break from reconsidering Jung's central theme in the 30s, which is the archetype of the spirit. We cannot capture the spirit despite capturing some spiritual changes in fMRI or psychological states. Conversely, we may be seized, agriven by the spirit or completely untouched by it. Jung considered Nietzsche to be seized, inflated by the archetype of the spirit, by the old wise Zarathustra. And Jung, observing the German abusive Wotan spirituality, tended to be touched by this inflated spirituality. In lecture 5, December 1st, 1939, Jung talks about meditating on Christ's passion in the exercises and about the problem of the suffering God. And in this context, he revisits Nietzsche and says that Nietzsche, who suffered from the Western problem, wrestled with it and was felt by it. I mean, the problem of the collapse of the church, of traditional Christianity, that unfortunately cannot be denied. He made the pronouncement, God is dead. God has died. And he didn't realize that in proclaiming this, he was actually within the dogma. And that is what was a Christian pronouncement. Because God had died. He's always dying, and the death of Christ is one of the mysteries of Christianity. Now, but Nietzsche didn't mean it like that. He meant God has come to an end. With that God coming to an end and having no successor, something very special happened for the world, Nietzsche didn't know that he would be God's successor. Jung underlines the psychological importance of the autonomous Geist. He treats spirit as a phenomenon rather than as a concept. Jung opposes the autonomous spirit to a materialistic psychology without a soul. However, he does not claim a spiritual bypassing of human nature, of our instinctual and bodily nature, existence. And that's what we read here. All people who claim to be spiritual try to get away from the fact of the body. They want to destroy it in order to be something imaginary. But they never will be that, because the body denies them. The body says otherwise. They think they can live without sex or feeling, without the ordinary human conditions, and it is a mistake, a lie, and the body denies their convictions. That is what Nietzsche means here. The Superman, the self, is the meaning of the earth, consists of the fact that we are made of earth. Therefore, when you study symbols of individuation, you always find that no individuation can take place, means symbolically, without the animal. The very dark animal coming up from primordial slime enters the region of the spirit. That one black spot, which is the earth, is absolutely indispensable on the bright shield of spirituality. Confronted with the archetype of the spirit and with the process of innovation, of transformation in spiritual and therapeutic processes, there are possible defense mechanisms, spiritual bypassing, avoiding transformation by rationalizations, persona shaping, etc. Spiritual neglect, not valorizing the other's spiritual dimension and my own. And spiritual inflation, being seized, possessed by a more or less malignant spirit, often with the best intentions. All in all, this requires discernment. Perhaps the best example of spiritual transformation is now the following. It is called Spiritus contra Spiritum. Jung's letter to Bill Wilson is well known. He suggests a discernment of spirits between the devil and the Holy Spirit, and comes to the famous helpful formula, Spiritus contra Spiritum. Jung's intervention inspired the 12 steps still used worldwide in the AA meetings. Can say the spiritual EA self-help movement is the best studied of all Jungian therapies, despite criticism of a recent Cochrane review. Additionally, it is a caveat against the hungry ghosts of Western civilization, searching for accelerated spiritual experiences with psychedelic drugs. This paper explores, say, the Osterholz, whether and how the multi-layered collective fascinations with psychedelics may yet be another symptoms pointing toward a deeper psychological and spiritual malaise in the Western psyche as diagnosed by C.G. Jung. So we have, this is a memory of my holidays in Sweden.
young wine without alcohol. However, as Ginny Hill and MacDonald and others have shown, the situation is more complex. Bill Wilson wrote a secret letter to Jung detailing his use of LSD and the success in treating alcoholics with LSD. We do not know whether Jung changed his opinion, given that he died before he could reply to these lines. We have seen the whole range of valid spiritual experience precipitated in this manner by LSD. So this is to discuss how Jung would have reacted to this proposal. Another critical point: is spirituality compulsory in AA groups? What about the non-religious? Let us remember that spirituality, as we understand it in healthcare, is not necessarily religious. It's an umbrella term, and it may encompass non-religious spiritual quests. I have talked with several members of an AA group, and I quote some of
so wie wir ihn verstanden, steht ja in der 12. Also ich höre raus, Spiritualität hat etwas mit Freiheit zu tun.
You find out yourself what others understand by God or higher power. As we understand Him, it says in the 12 steps. The way we understand Him. There is some freedom in looking what is spirituality for those different persons. A religious person here with the Catholic background, the nice thing for me here at the AAs is that I can let go of this punishing God for the time being, and by letting go, a space can open up, and there's also no fixed time frame for when this has to happen, so that something new can emerge. I need help, and I have understood from the AAs, as we understand Him, God, that I can, so to speak, muddle Him along. Or Alex, it's actually about the spirit, and that we always have the word God in our program, which causes some people to stumble, and we have a much nicer definition in the second step. A power greater than ourselves. And I got to know this on my first evening in the meeting with the people sitting at these tables, a power greater than ourselves, where I had the impression that they could do something with the topic of God, and I couldn't at that time. But he found nevertheless his way towards this spiritual endeavor, which is the AA movement. A last citation from this group. After a period of abstinence from God, look at this expression, abstinence. I always had the feeling that there was a power greater than myself. I've had that almost since the very first days. I have this feeling. I'm a trained scientist. I have always thought, well, God starts where I stop thinking. For my sake, that was a very arrogant attitude. And I realized that it is very soothing. And then at some point, I actually started to reduce these first 3 steps in our program to 3 short sentences. I can't, you can, so we do it. That was the 3rd step. And that was my prayer for quite some time. I started referring to my higher power often as HP, higher power, from the video game. Jung comments on the Ignatian principle and foundation in the number 23 of the exercise, and especially on the sentence El hombre es criado, the human person is created. His interpretation, we are anticipated by the unconscious. And here we have another citation from the Zarathustra seminars about creation and about creativity. Here you have it. Only people with an inflation can assume that they create. You don't create, you are created. In creation, you are created. Something makes you do it. Something is working through you. You are most tremendously instrumental. Try to stop creation and see what happens. If creation were our own doing, we could say yes or no, but it is a well-known fact that the creator cannot say yes or no. He has to create, and woe unto him if he does not. In other words, creativity is not the fruit of our conscious will, but rather the acceptance of the unknown, of beyond's all, of the uncontrollable unconscious. Without obedience and humility, creativity will be destroyed by inflation. And Jung about Ignatius, if we understand the words creatus est homo, the human person is created, in this way, then of course our outlook changes considerably. Because if we assume that everything that we are comes from our own consciousness, then we are entirely justified in feeling a diabolical hybris. Then we make claims such as, where there's a will, there's a way, and the like, and think we are the gods of this world. But unfortunately, there is a multitude of different gods, not just one, and each tries as hard as they can to be the only God, which leads to all kinds of conflicts, as we know. If, on the other hand, we understand this creatus est homo correctly, then we tell ourselves that we are something that has come about, a product, that we are anticipated. We were there and did not know it. It was known, only we do not know who knew it. This question must remain open. Interestingly, we come back to this circular movement because we get to know what was unknown, and when we create, we accept that we are created. So creativity is acceptance of this receptive createdness. In other words, we need, in a certain sense, a destruction of our selfish creativity. I quote once more the seminars about Nietzsche, May 23rd, 1934. But inasmuch as you say that creative forces are in Nietzsche or in me or anywhere else, you cause an inflation. Because man does not possess creative powers, he is possessed by them. That is the truth. If he allows himself to be thoroughly possessed by them without questioning, without looking at them, there is no inflation. But the moment he splits off, when he thinks, I am the fellow, an inflation follows. Somebody asks, can it be avoided? Jung answers, only by obeying completely without attempting to look at yourself. You must be quite naive. End of this quotation. Let's come to our conclusion. Let's come full circle. I try to show that spiritual transformation is not a linear, but a circular process. In particular, dreams and imaginations surprise us with a creativity we have not made ourselves, despite the importance of our agency, of the dream ego's agency. When we consider Rösler's investigations about the structural analysis of dreams, the dream ego's agency is a vital process sign in the dream series. Agency is a sign of vitality, not only in our daily conscious endeavors, but also in dreams. Imagination is all this non-directed fantasy thinking is opposed by Jung to directed thinking. Knowledge in beyond sense tries to grasp concepts, to understand through definitions. This is why many researchers and interested persons put efforts in definitions of spirituality. Conversely, Jung teaches us that the life of spirit is not grasping concepts, but being seized, ergriffen by the spirit. Accordingly, we see the same movement in Beyond's faith in all and in the Jung ego self-axis. In other words, there is a more active component of agency and a more passive and receptive dimension of being seized by the spirit. Transformations, on the one hand, comprise an active process of modeling attitudes, relationships, and the outer world, the dream ego's progressive agency in the context of dream series. On the other hand, transformation is gratitude, acceptance of createdness, as Ignatius of Loyola says, often quoted by Jung. Createdness that transforms an acting subject into a spiritual person, opening his or herself towards transcendence. Imagination and still more dreaming remind us we are active, although not only knowing K, but searching the unknown O in an apophatic way. In this apophasis A, opposed to knowledge K. Apophatic in the tradition of negative theology reminds us that we can never control nor define God, that we cannot dispose of God. The spiritual experience can also inform our attitude as analysts. Thank you for your attention.